And also, not only does God want us to rescue our world, He wants us to rescue this city. It's not a coincidence that you come to this church. Many of you, it's not a coincidence that you live in the city of Elizabeth. And even if you don't live in the city of Elizabeth, just because God has drawn you to this church, there's a reason for you to be here. God has called us to rescue this city.
Christ Fellowship began when 5 pastors got together and asked me, what are we going to do next in the city of Elizabeth? And my wife and I were called to minister here in the city of Elizabeth. And we determined very quickly that we would just start another church.
We had the idea of starting Christ Fellowship, and all us pastors were together. We were at the Renaissance building, which is on Jersey Street, and we were meeting in one of the pastors' apartments. At the time, we had the entire hotel, and each floor had different ministries. So one of the pastors had an apartment on one of the floors, and we all gathered together, and we were praying, and we were asking God, and we were rejoicing that we wanted to start this church, but we needed to have a name.
And Pastor Reggie, who was one of the 5 people who got together with Pastor Reggie, myself, Pastor Raul, Pastor Bill, and Pastor Loretta, all got together, and Pastor Reggie said, well, you're all about fellowship, and Christ is the center of our church, so why don't we call it Christ Fellowship? So the name was born right then and there. Pastor Bill and his wife took the task of getting us an office space, which we had nothing at the particular time, so they went off on an adventure. And Pastor Raul, because of our connection, myself and he had a connection with the high school because there was a lot of gang issues at the particular time. We had worked with the parents of the gang members, and there was no more gang problems for about 2 or 3 years. So the principal of the high school, as well as the Board of Ed, was very appreciative. So we made a call, actually Pastor Raul made a call, and very quickly we had a place to meet. Then we didn't have any instruments. So Madeline Townsend made a call to Max Bail Bonds. She had a connection there because of her previous work, and they gave us $500 to buy a set of drums. Everybody else brought their own instruments. We were ready to go within a matter of an hour or 2. And that's how we launched Christ Fellowship.
In the formation of the church, we got notice on a Tuesday that we were going to meet for the first time as Christ Fellowship at the Dwyer Auditorium. So the fellowship groups were crucial in communicating this information. Within one day, all of the fellowship group leaders contacted all of their people. We didn't have, you have to understand, we didn't have, 20 years ago, we didn't have text, we didn't have even email to communicate. So we got on the phone, we contacted all our people, and in less than a week, at that very first service at the Dwyer Auditorium, we had well over 300 people. It was awesome.
I will never forget the first service of Christ Fellowship. It was the first Sunday after the 4th of July. I guess that would make it the 5th of July. And word got out that we were meeting at Dwyer High School. And I was doing announcements that day. The auditorium was packed. And as always, I said, if you are visiting here for the very first time, please stand up. The entire church stood up for the first time. The feeling in the room was electric. It was just exciting because everyone that was there wanted to be there. And the word had gotten out that that's where we were meeting. And so the church was born on that day.
Even though we didn't have a lot, it was the spirit was very high. The energy was very high. You could tell that it was something new happening when we started that first service. And I'll just never forget how it was 20 years ago, but it seems like yesterday. I'll never forget that moment, or just setting up and experiencing the new chapter that God had us as a body for the first time.
Well, let me tell all of you about the Bridge Youth Ministries. Just to let you know, right now, currently, we meet in several different locations throughout the city of Elizabeth, and we reach out to over 300 teenagers weekly. Now, taking you back to when it began in the year 2000.
I remember we had a meeting in maybe May 2000, and we started asking ourselves questions like, well, okay, we have this new youth ministry. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to make this thing work? And so we sat down one afternoon and we just started sharing ideas and things for like ways we can structure the program and things that we can do with the program and how we can help it to grow and how we can reach students in the city of Elizabeth. And I remember we were trying to come up with a new name for the program since it was going to be a brand new kind of a thing that we were going to be doing from scratch. And I remember Carlos said, "What about the Bridge?" And we all just kind of paused for a second, and we were like, "That's not a very good name." Then he's like, "No, but we can. Here's why we can call it the Bridge, and we can make our motto like uniting the hearts of youth with the heart of God, and we can be a bridge for the kids in the city of Elizabeth to get to God." And so we kind of thought about it for a few minutes, and we're like, "You know what? That's actually a pretty good name, actually."
And God laid on our hearts to call it the Bridge, uniting the hearts of youth with the heart of God. And I remember as clear as day, God blessing it. We started with 7 kids. Within like 2 or 3 months, we were at 75. And we've seen thousands of kids come through our ministry.
So I remember when we purchased the Liberty Center, before we even began construction, walking in this place. I mean, it was a disaster in some ways because it was in poor repair. There was damage from water and fire. But walking through that auditorium, I felt such a joy because I could see, I had the vision to see and picture what we have today.
We walked into it, and along with a realtor, and it was just totally deteriorated. Stairs had collapsed, the stage had collapsed, the place was an absolute mess. It stunk, there was mold all over everywhere. It was a wreck. And Pastor Reggie said, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "This is a horror." A year later, I'm still saying no. Pastor Reggie and now Pastor Raul are on the bandwagon. Everybody's putting pressure, saying we really should do this, we can do this, we can do this. Other people had come on board trying to make it all come together. It would seem as though God had put a lot together since that first time. And finally, I said, let's do it. And we felt as though we'd gotten the nod from God to do that kind of thing after much prayer. Prophetic word had come to us that we weren't going to borrow any money to do it. God was going to provide all along through the faithfulness of his people giving. He was going to make sure that that happened, which he did.
I remember those early days, Tuesdays and Saturdays, devoting that time to rebuilding this place, bringing liberty to life. It was a very exciting time, but it took 7 years.
There came a time where I was starting to think, I was now in my 50s, how do you best have a succession plan? In other words, how do you bring another pastor in? I'd seen a lot of disasters, a lot of people staying too long, as far as as a senior pastor, and the congregation suffered. As a result, sometimes they would replace it with somebody, but it would be a last-minute kind of a thing, and they usually went through a series of leaders, and it was very damaging to the congregation. I didn't want that to happen to Christ Fellowship.
So technically, 3 years ago was the transition between Pastor Gary and I in the eyes of the congregation. But the transition really started 5 years prior to that, meeting with the elders when he approached me and he told me what he believes in his heart and what he sees the potential that I had to lead.
We had been building up over a 5-year term. We had a planned method to continue on. We had already recognized that it would be Pastor Carlos. I brought that to the elders and they said yes. We all agreed in the spirit. And so we started on a method or a program to make that happen.
And just wanted to make sure that we honor God through the process and be able to do it as seamlessly as possible so that it doesn't impact in any way negatively the congregation, but we wanted to be a blessing to the church as a whole. So without question, here we are, and we just know that God's doing amazing things in our church. It's an honor for me to be the senior pastor, to shepherd the flock, and to be there side by side with all of you as well, knowing that God has amazing things in store for us. We know that Christ Fellowship is without question going to leave its mark here in the city of Elizabeth. God has called us to rescue this city. We're about living it out, because God doesn't want us just to know about him and just to worship him, but he wants us to partner in this mission with him.